Hello there, viewers. I know it's been a while since I posted, other than the previous video, which was a little bit of Geodash and Pixel Car. What I was trying to do on that last video, I was trying to do a first attempt blast processing, 100% complete, and not dying, but phone was acting up, so. But anyways, today will be the start of something new. Today we will start a new series where I break down and explain and theorize on Metallica and their discography. And this is going to be, how this is going to be done is I'm going to break it down into three parts: the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s. So the first part that we can break down is the 1980s. Obviously, which then the 1980s can be broken down into three volumes. Volume 1, which would include from the formation of Metallica in 1980 till the small success of Kill 'Em All in 1983. Well, 1982, 1983. Second part would be from Ride the Lightning, 1984, till the death of Cliff Burton in 1986. And then Volume 3 is from basically when they hired Jason Newsted in 1987 till the end of the Justice Tour in 1989. So first of all, Volume 1, all that can really be said about it. Oh, and before I get into that, is most of this is my own opinion and me theorizing from those opinions about the hardcore evidence that presents itself within the songs, the albums, the lyrics, and just about the band itself. I'm not trying to call out the band on anything. I love Metallica with all my heart. Absolutely love Lars, Dave, Kirk, James, Robert, Cliff, Jason, everybody, even Ron, and everybody who were a part of Metallica or contributed to their success. So I'm not trying to call out anybody. I'm just trying to build opinions, I guess, in a somewhat storyline upon, well, the albums themselves, the discography, the songs, the music, in which I oriented and hear it, I guess. So to start off with Volume 1 in Trilogy 1, we got basically from the formation of Metallica in 1980, around there, to early 1981, till small success of Kill 'Em All in 1983. Obviously 1980, we'll just go based upon that. 1980, the band forms. Lars Ulrich, from when he moves, once he moved out of his parents' house, way after they moved from Denmark to California, I think. And he's looking for, then the small-time drummer's looking for more band members to join his band, Metallica. And legally, truthfully, the fact is, Lars Ulrich owns the name Metallica legally. So there's that, and I don't know if he came up with the name or they all did. But then, who answers the call? James Hetfield. He didn't play guitar, or he didn't sing. He just played guitar, and yeah. And then there was that, and then there was Dave Mustaine, guitarist. After he came out of Trauma, which was his band, and that's another story for another time. But yeah, his life, and then Ron McGovney, the very first bassist of Metallica. For all those people who think it was Cliff Burton, it's not. It was Ron McGovney. It's just Ron McGovney had a very small part, but a very big part in early day Metallica. Yes, Cliff did contribute to a lot, like on Anesthesia, Kill 'Em All, Cthulhu, on Ride the Lightning, and Orion on Master of Puppets. But in the very, very beginning, it was Ron McGovney with Hit the Lights and some of the very first songs, going going into 1981, Ron McGovney, I think, I'm pretty sure of what I've heard, is he either left or they kicked him out. I don't know for sure. Again, when this is posted, really helps if you guys comment down below and tell me, like, walk me through it specifically. I'm just going off of what I've heard and what I've seen, what I think I know. Again, because I say I think I know because I may not actually know the truth. And so, yeah, there's Ron McGovney's out, and Cliff Burton comes in, and, well, if you know Cliff Burton, he is pretty genius on the bass. But more about him later. Then, basically, the creation of Hit the Lights, Jump in the Fire, which the original lyrics to Jump in the Fire by Dave Mustaine were a lot more explicit and a lot more of a mature content. So, won't specifically say it in this video, because don't want to get demonetized, but just gonna say explicit content for mature audiences. But the new lyrics are not as bad as the original. You'd have to ask Dave Mustaine about that if you ever get a chance to meet him, which I want to. And then Motor Breath, I think, was added 1982 or early 1982. Anesthesia was one of the last songs off of Kill 'Em All to be added late 82, I think, or mid 82, just before they released Kill 'Em All. Phantom Lord and Whiplash were definitely definitely pretty good. No Remorse, Seek and Destroy, and Metal Militia were all... Seek and Destroy was added near the end. Same with, I think, Metal Militia was one of the first ones to do it. Oh, the Four Horsemen. That is the one I'm missing. And that is the one of the... Next to Hit the Lights was one of the bigger songs. One of some of the biggest songs off of Kill 'Em All. Because originally it was called The Mechanics. And if you're a Megadeth fan, you would probably know what off of Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. This song The Mechanics was originally written by Dave Mustaine and was basically after Dave Mustaine was fired going into 1982 because he had problems with drinking and other problems between him and the band members. That's when we get our legendary Kirk Hammett. And shout out to Kirk Hammett fangirl. She absolutely loves Kirk Hammett, and that's when we get our Wallmaster coming into the game. And from then on, after Ron is out and Cliff is in, Dave is out and Kirk is in, we get our main classic 80s lineup of Metallica. More about Four Horsemen was that why, if you're an analyst or a person who analyzes songs to see if one sounds similar or it sounds the same as the other or has hidden parts like other songs, then Four Horsemen and The Mechanics are the same riff. Two different sets of lyrics, though. And the reason why is because Four Horsemen or Mechanics, Phantom Lord, Jump in the Fire, Metal Militia, and I think Motor Breath were all written by Dave Mustaine, where the riffs were. Jump in the Fire was the very first riff Dave Mustaine brought to James and Lars. So, that was that around that time. Sorry, I just gotta adjust this so that my phone actually stands up, hopefully. Please stand up. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's not good. Anyways, as I was saying, please, camera, stay still. Angering. Yeah, and this is probably gonna go into the final version now, isn't it? Stay. Okay, the camera's good now. So as I was saying, yeah, won't we get our final lineup after Kirk is added, and we get all our final songs off of Kill 'Em All? What my interpretation of Kill 'Em All is like if we were to create a fantasized story about Metallica based upon the album covers, I would say Kill 'Em All is like basically describing how they partied. Like that, once they got famous off Kill 'Em All, they were basically street gang people, like a gang street group, but like not like big, like a mob, I guess. And I'm talking like a fan of what I get from it. What I orientate and think about off of Kill 'Em All, because what I see is like hammer, blood, hand. What I'm seeing is like somebody. Well, it makes sense. Kill 'Em All, like, and most of the songs like Hit the Lights is about, well, just them playing their songs on stage and like their early days of all the live gigs and that they did before they got famous. Four Horsemen, obviously talking about the original, or Cliff, James, Lars, and Dave, talking about that. Motor Breath, obviously, I want to say was talking about alcohol, I think. Maybe not. Jump in the Fire, I want to say is kind of like basically joining in with like people who do drugs and like that whole rock star type of life. I want to say that's what Jump in the Fire is, how I interpret it. Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, I want to say it's kind of hard because it doesn't have lyrics and it's just bass. All I could interpretate it to that is that it really it's describing maybe the, like, with the way he has the way he did did the bass, and with a little bit of Lars's drums near the end. I want to say maybe it's just him just musically describing a trip to the dentist. I don't know. Maybe him describing he got in a fight. Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth. Got drugged. I don't know. It's kind of hard because it doesn't have lyrics. And that's why instrumentals are, I think, more hard to describe. Whiplash. Not a physical, like a whip. But like probably like having hard force, using hard force, fighting, stuff like that. I want to say Phantom Lord. Maybe like traveling in the night and just like vigilante kind of stuff, trying to be a hero. Again, it's just an interpretation. No Remorse, obviously, probably like in a fantasy type world based upon the discography here, the albums and that, like their gang or their like street group, they have no remorse for because they're drinking a lot and they're like against killing and fighting other gangs when they're on their territory, or they're stealing, or they're fighting and they don't have remorse. I want to say Seek and Destroy, obviously that's where the main whole idea of like they're in a gang or they're on the street comes from. Like they're gonna hunt somebody down, they're hunting targeted people down to kill them, and that's again Kill 'Em All. Then there's Metal Militia. Maybe I guess I could interpret it as maybe one of them was a army veteran, or like they came out of the army, I guess. Or like maybe just because they're strong. All I can imagine is like one of them, like either Cliff or James or someone, like they have an old army helmet, or they were in the military, and they're not really a veteran, but like just they were a retired cadet, I guess. And then technically, if we include the bonus songs, which were a Diamond Head cover and a Blitzkrieg cover, Am I Evil by Diamond Head and Blitzkrieg by Blitzkrieg, um, we could back up the whole thing of one or more of the four members of Metallica, or one of more of the Four Horsemen, meaning we're talking Cliff, Dave, James, and Lars were in the military, and that's why why they refer to Blitzkrieg. Am I Evil? Again, most of Metallica's songs, I feel, are definitely basing it upon their roots, which were mainly Diamond Head or Motorhead, Diamond Head, and Iron Maiden, I guess. I'm pretty sure. Which, like, Kill 'Em All, that makes sense. Like, 27, Everyone Was Nice. Gotta see them make to pay the price. See their bodies out on the ice. Take my time. Meaning, like, if you've heard the song Am I Evil, whether it's the Metallica cover or it's the original Diamond Head song, then you kind of maybe know the meaning. The main meaning of what I get from it is that boy, back in like the times of witch hunting, his mother was accused, like the village people accused his mother of being a witch, and back in those times they burned witches, or they burned women and girls who were accused of being a witch, and they burned them at the stake. Yes, violent. It was something very bad in medieval times, or around that time, 1300s, 1400s ish. But like this boy who gets his mother's accused of being a witch, is burned alive, and he can't do anything to save her, but he's gonna try and take revenge upon the people who burned his mother, and that's what it's talking about. And he probably kills them during wintertime because see their bodies out on the ice. That's where I get that interpretation from, I guess. But that's Am I Evil. That's another discussion. The constant Am I Evil, Diamond Head / other main influence, constant theme throughout all of Metallica's discography. That's another story for another time, or video essay, I guess. But overall, that's where that would lie. And like, this is what they look like. I guess this is not the, like, not including Dave, but like, again, I only say that Dave would be one of the Four Horsemen is because he helped write the original Four Horsemen, which was Mechanics. And not gonna get into the meaning of the song Mechanics because that's a different story for another time. So we're in the main timeline, the real life timeline. By 1982, 1983, Kill 'Em All is doing grand on American soil. Metallica is still considered an underground thrash band because the idea of thrash in the early 80s, or thrash metal, speed metal, power metal, really didn't exist yet. Metal itself was still kind of, obviously it had been birthed. It was birthed, theoretically, in 1969 with Black Sabbath and their Paranoid album, and then just continued on from there with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and many other bands along the line, but that's about it. So moving into Volume 2 of Trilogy 1, Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, the way I interpreted Ride the Lightning, this was the second album released in 1984. In between 83 84, I guess there was a Horseman of the Apocalypse demo, which was pretty good, and basically had a bunch of other songs like You and Me, Rock Me, Let It Loose, and technically When Hell Freezes Over was the original version of Call of Cthulhu. A bunch of those songs were demos. And did you know Dave Mustaine also wrote Ride the Lightning? Like, it even says, if you can see that, in this lyric book, right there under Ride the Lightning, credits go to Cliff Burton, Dave Mustaine, Lars Ulrich, and James Hetfield. So there's physical proof that Dave Mustaine helped contribute to Ride the Lightning. Even though he was fired from Metallica, his name was still put on there. Ride the Lightning, I think I like to interpret it as Metallica's first death album, I guess, or with the theme of death put in place, not just because of Fade to Black or Ride the Lightning the song, but like you have a electric chair on the front. That makes sense. I think I could also refer to this album as Metallica Supercharged or something like that. So the way this would fit into more of the fantasy story type of story would have been like by this time one of their friends was killed. One of the four horsemen would have been killed and executed on the electric chair, and they seem to be affected by it. Like, we have Fight Fire with Fire, which I interpret as again, just fighting, starting a war. Ride the Lightning, obviously, which means death, being killed in the electric chair. For Whom the Bell Tolls. In this actual song, in the actual song, it's talking about some civil war, based upon a civil war, and only 5 men surviving, but then just dying because they couldn't escape. But how I would interpret it as the saying "For whom the bell tolls" means like back in the day, church bell would go off to notify that somebody had died. That's why I interpret it as Ride the Lightning is they're being put on death row, or after and then their punishment, their penalty is being carried out, penalty of death, being through the electric chair. And then For Whom the Bell Tolls, meaning the burial, I guess, of them, or the notification to the rest of the town of wherever they live, probably somewhere in California, because that's where Metallica was based at the time, and that's where they formed, notifying that the bell is gone, the death bell has gone off, somebody's died. Fade to Black, obviously it's about death, a certain type of death. We're not allowed to say it here because of YouTube's guidelines. I'm not saying, not arguing with them, just saying that's what they are. Definitely the subject is for more mature audiences, that's for sure. Like myself and many others, around the age of 16 to into adult. But overall, I think of it as the same way as after losing their friend, especially James, or the fantasy character that represents James Hetfield, is quite affected by it. And in real life, it was more the same thing because he got his stuff stolen. And the rest of the men got their stuff stolen because it was in a van. When they were either in the studio, they were somewhere, and then their van got stolen with a whole bunch of good stuff. They actually recorded Ride the Lightning, and I believe Master of Puppets in Europe, with Fleming Rasmussen, and they actually had to make the acoustic guitar for, I think, Fight Fire with Fire and Fade to Black. They had to bore an acoustic guitar in the middle of the night. Trapped Under Ice, I want to say, again, maybe another Am I Evil reference because of the ice part. Who knows? Maybe the boy who wanted revenge, who cast revenge on the people who killed his mother, he didn't kill everybody that he thought he did, and one of them got trapped under the ice, mentioned in the song. And they're screaming for help, saying, "I'm alive, help me, I'm alive. I didn't die." But they surely end up dying because they're of hypothermia and being trapped under ice. Run out of oxygen, you freeze to death. And did you know Metallica actually did, I think it was either 2006 or 1997 or somewhere in the future, that they actually played a show in Antarctica. They called it Freeze 'Em All. But they wasted their opportunity because they didn't play Trapped Under Ice. Not too many bands, and I referenced this fact from Andrei Veselenko. I probably butchered that name, but shout out to him. Uh, he that's where that fact, I guess, comes from. I didn't know that until he said that. So here's that. And then there's Escape. I want to say it's because it has prison sirens in the prison sirens near the end. And I want to say it's about one of the four of them going to prison for something. If Kill 'Em All was interpreted as them being like a street gang or like being on the streets and like living in the hood in California in wherever they lived, then Ride the Lightning I interpret it as the first Death album. Then like already, if we include Dave in this, then that would include Dave, James, Lars, Cliff, and Kirk. What if the guy who died on the electric chair was Dave? What if it was? Think about it. And then their next friend, and then what if Cliff, or what if Kirk went to jail? Or James, or Lars? One of the four of them went to prison. We're not including Cliff because he will encounter something later on that makes him unalive. And Escape is, I want to say it's James Hetfield, if in our fantasy world, in our fantasy timeline, that he's the one who goes to prison but manages to escape. Then there's Creeping Death, obviously reciting events in the book of Exodus in the Bible. Me personally, I'm not exactly religious, but I understand the meaning. It's a really good song. Maybe it was just something he picked up in prison, because I think you're allowed to have a Bible in prison. I think. I think you're allowed to have one. I don't know. But maybe he's just repeating something he read in the Bible and he's putting it into a song. That's about all I can think about it. And then there's Call of Cthulhu. It's our second Cliff masterpiece, or it's a piece of art, that's for sure. A piece of grand art. Call of Cthulhu I don't think would have anything to do with our fantasy timeline, other than it's just Cliff screwing around, kind of. Just him writing what he wants to write while James is in prison before James escapes. And that's really all I have for Ride the Lightning. And then moving into Master Puppets, Chapter 2, Volume 2 of Trilogy 1. Obviously Master Puppets, the factually the second best album in Metallica's lineup. The way I interpret this is it mainly most of the songs depict either social issues or war. And what I'm thinking, how I interpret this in our fantasy timeline, well, I guess before we jump to that, Master Puppets was released in 1986, and it's pretty damn good album. Definitely want a grand album, that's for sure. Then the way I interpret this kind of way I would interpret the Master Puppets in terms of like our fantasy timeline, I think would be starting with Battery. I want to say let's say after Ride the Lightning, obviously Dave Mustaine, or hypothetically in our fantasy timeline, Dave Mustaine was put to death on the electric chair. James Hetfield almost unalived himself because of death of his friend, and James Hetfield went to prison but managed to escape. And now the four of them, James, Cliff, Kirk, and Lars, now are facing a decision: either go to prison or they've been being addressed by the government. Either option one, you go to prison and you rot until you die, or option two, you join the military and you and we eventually will pardon you for all your crimes. And so, let's say they take option two and they join the military. And I'm thinking that most of the songs off of Master of Puppets that have to do with war are what experiences they found out on the battlefield. And I don't know if there was any grand wars in the 1980s. I don't think. May comment down below when this is posted. But here we go. Battery. I obviously in real life it's a referring to Battery Street. It was a street that had a club there that they used to play at. But in terms of our fantasy timeline, I want to say battery as in they're talking about a artillery battery, something to do with war. Which is a very powerful machine that can kill a lot of people. Master Puppets, in real life, has to do with. I recently found this out. It was a big metaphor for drugs. Because in the 80s, if you didn't know, there was a lot of stories in that had to do with drugs, and a lot of influencing too, because that was the rock star lifestyle. In terms of our fantasy timeline, let's say I want maybe if the interpretation is that it's about drugs, maybe it's talking about a certain pill or a certain medication that they take on the battlefield to stay awake, to keep fighting. I don't know. That's what I want to guess, to interpretate. And then the thing that should not be, again, another Cthulhu reference, or LP, or I want to say LP Lovecraft, or LB Lovecraft. The guy, that's one of the books, like in real life, Cliff Burton loved LP Lovecraft and his stories that he read, that Cliff read, and so that's where Cthulhu came from. And now the thing that should not be is about hybrid fish children. The thing that should not be in our terms of our fantasy timeline, I would say, since it's a Cliff Burton relation, I will say it's an extra. So, and then Welcome Home Sanitarium, I want to say, let's say this is after they get returned home from war and they're pardoned. One, they're pardoned from all their crimes, but two, they have tons of horrors upon the battlefield. Let's just say that maybe that's what Cthulhu, pulling anesthesia, pulling teeth, Cthulhu, and the thing that should not be thus far, or let's say Cliff maybe had some mental disability. In real life, he didn't, obviously, but in our fantasy timeline, let's say that happened. That's maybe why he's writing such exotic, taboo, weird, dark stuff, because he has something wrong with his head. So, Welcome Home Sanitarium, I want to say, is, in real life, the song's interpretation is about a man who is sent to a mental asylum, but he wasn't actually insane, but he did go insane because the people wouldn't let him out, like the doctors and the staff and that wouldn't let him out because they thought he was insane. And he only went insane because he was kept in a place with people who were actually insane. And mental asylums were somewhat of a big thing in the 80s, or a trending thing in the 80s. Again, mental asylums have been around since the 1800s, basically, to treat mentally unwell patients. For Cliff Burton, in our fantasy timeline, let's say he was put in there as a patient and eventually got over it, or eventually, after he was there, and then eventually learning about, and then James and the rest of James, Kirk, and Lars eventually finding out what kind of horrors lie beyond the doors in the sanitarium, maybe decided to take him out of there, remove him as fast as possible. Although in our fantasy timeline, Cliff was still insane. A little bit. Tad bit. Not too much. Then Disposable Heroes, basically upon receiving letters that Cliff, Kirk, Lars, and James have been fully pardoned from all the crimes they committed while they were still on the streets, and that, and including James Hetfield breaking out of prison and escaping. So they're fully pardoned now, and well, let's just say they get a little bit of a pension, a little bit of pension money from the government because the government felt sorry for them, and rewarded them, I guess, for their services. I don't know how it actually works in the military, whether you get paid or not. I don't know, but let's just say in our fantasy timeline they do get paid, just a tad bit though, not too much. But then they realize, they think about it, they take a step back and like, the government's really just using us. We're just chess pieces in their game. And I don't know if that topic of disposable heroes and its true meaning sparks any political conflict. I don't really take any side as of now. I'm trying to stay neutral. I'm just explaining what I think, what I orientate the song as, and incorporating that into the fantasy timeline. And so I don't mean to spark any political debates or whether the government is using soldiers just as toys basically, but like the words in the song is what I mainly reference the theory off of, like 21 only son, born to kill, not to care. Kind of seems like basically the interpretation of these being used, of soldiers are just being used as playthings in a political game of chess, checkers, whatever, between two governments. That's how I think of it as. Then Leopard Messiah, in real life, the song comes out to the real meaning is like, back in the 80s, there was a lot of, and it still happens now, but like a lot of ads saying, call now, buy this, like we want your money. I think it's either that or it was the church. Oh, I think it was the main meaning of it was about, because James Hetfield, when he was little, he was, if you're a Metallica fan or if you listen into Metallica facts or whatever, then you should know, or if you don't know, then I'm going to explain it, but James Hetfield, when he was younger, he was in a type of religion called Christian Science. I don't know too much about it, so I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm just going off of what I know about James Hetfield and what James Hetfield's revealed about all of it. And my own interpretations of what I hear is that James Hetfield, like, he wasn't allowed to go into health class because that didn't stick with the rules that were laid down by Christian Science. That's why his mother died of cancer, because she believed in that certain type of religion, in that spirituality. She had that spirituality and believed in that religion that God would save her. But the cancer took over and killed her. And I'm not taking sides on who's right and who's wrong. I'm just explaining what I've heard, what I've been told, and what I've seen, read, etc. But like, Leopard Messiah, how it comes out is James Hetfield really, I think he meant the meaning of Leopard Messiah to be like, the church is, give us money and stuff, like, pay your way into heaven, almost. And I don't know if that sparks a religious controversy or conflict between the government, the people, and the church. I not taking sides, just explaining. Basically what it's interpreted as, what James Hetfield, I think what he revealed was that it was like the churches, the priests and the church staff and guests, like, asking money and saying, like, pay us and then you can get into heaven. Like, God will allow you into heaven if you pay out money. And it was really just the church's way of making money, really. And it's quite sad. And I think it still goes on today. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. again, not taking sides, again, not creating fights, not starting wars, just explaining and just reflecting on what is being explained. Then there's Orion, since is again a Cliff masterpiece, or Cliff Burn's greatest masterpiece, then it's really doesn't add to our story other than, again, in our fantasy timeline he's a tad bit insane, so maybe Orion is, again, maybe him looking at the stars and thinking, something's out there, I'm gonna write about it or play about it, I guess. Then there's Damage Incorporated. I want to say in our I don't necessarily remember what the real life meaning was, but in our fantasy story, I'm gonna say it's that even though James and crew were pardoned, they still see, well, what war can do, the power, the effects and results of war and destruction and fighting and weapons. And Damage Incorporated, I want to say, is like, war destroys people's lives. It destroys people, destroys buildings. Like hell, even fighting against person versus person, it destroys people's love for one another. Like, in a way of like creating peace, not war. I want to say it's like that. For our fantasy story, the main blunt term is that they see what's going on around them. And, like, sometimes the government can be unfair. Sometimes life can be unfair. Sometimes people, like, your neighbor could be unfair to you. Like, that's what I see in Damage Incorporated. Like, these four guys, they've just been pardoned after getting home from the military. And they're like, wow, it really has a big effect. And, like, we're glad we stopped fighting. We stopped being on the street. I really don't want to go back to that. And so now they have because they got the pension from the government, now they can start living somewhat normal lives. And that's really all what I have for Master of Puppets. In real life, 1986, September 27th, Cliff Burton tragically died, which is sad. And maybe in our fantasy timeline, let's say Cliff Burton, maybe because of his insanity, he drove himself to death. Eventually, not killing himself. I don't know if that was appropriate to say, but it's not at least it's not the other word. But like driving himself, his little tiny bit of insanity evolved into a massive one, and he eventually wound up back in the same sanitarium that he was in before, and eventually dying due to insanity. Then there's a black part, or Volume 3 of Trilogy 1, the Injustice for All phase. Justice for All has a big chunk of content in it. Everything from the lack of the lack of Jason's bass, Lars's drumming, James's evolved vocals, and Kirk's, let's say, different choice of solo. Still Wah, obviously, because that's Kirk Hammett's style of solos, but it was rough. It was rocky. Starting off with our fantasy timeline, after James, Lars, Kirk, and Cliff. After Cliff eventually wound up taking his small percent of sanity, and it evolving into big pieces of insanity that affected his mental state. He was eventually taken or enlisted back into the same sanitarium, or just taken away because he was a danger to himself, danger to other people, danger to the rest of the world around him, and eventually died of insanity. And they're like, well, that sucks, and they were really affected by it, just like they were in real life when Cliff actually died. So, they got Jason Newsted. Like, literally, the day after Cliff's funeral, they held bass auditions. And, but in our fantasy timeline, they got Jason Newsted because he apparently knew all about, he was really, I guess in our fantasy timeline, the story, hypothetically, Jason Newsted, he connected with James Hetfield and and Kirk and Lars and with the whole, hey, I hate this social injustice and all this, and that's really what the thing of Injustice for All really turns out to be. Blackened, I don't remember what it really, I I don't really know the real life definition or terminology. But in uh, our fantasy timeline, let's say Blackened was really about how like certain people are shut down, certain like cases and law firms and that, and certain like this person sues this other person for a stupid reason, and the people who are speaking the truth get put down and just they fade. They fade away because they can't, because the justice system is unfair. And then the song "Injustice for All." So I'm just gonna, if I refer to "Injustice for All," talking about the album, if I say just "Justice" or AJFA, AJFA, I guess, and not talking about the song. So "Justice," like the song, I want to say is then just overall disclaiming, basically putting up a big banner and saying it's just like, we join our cause to fight against injustices. And not just for money, no, just to help. They want to help. They want to, like James, Lars, and Kurt, they want to help. They take Jason Newsted's composable, they take his idea, they accept his idea, which is really good, but they're also still under the effect of losing Cliff Burton and due to insanity, and so they slowly, once they get their cause rolling, get the ball rolling, get their cup full of money, then they start to loosen out, drink some more, which they, in real life, that's what they did, because they had so much money after making, Kill 'Em All, Riot Lightning, and Master of Puppets, and the 598 EP cover album. In real life, they did pick on Jason Newsted a lot because to toughen him up, like Cliff Burton. And most of this affected especially going into the 90s, before Jason Newsted left Metallica in 2001. Yeah, and then on our fantasy thing, I want to say they eventually did not turn on Jason, but in behind the scenes picked on him. Eye of the Beholder, that one's kind of hard, actually. In real life, I don't really know the real life meaning, and I really can't interpret it into our fantasy storyline. The song "One" obviously is about the effects of war, specifically about a guy who got blown up or got caught in a landmine. One is very confusing because especially the backstory, is based upon the story of a young soldier who got his limbs blown off and had stubs. Didn't have arms, didn't have legs, or didn't have legs below the knee, didn't have arms past the elbow. So, but it was set in World War I. But the song, you can hear helicopter, and helicopters weren't invented until the 60s and not used in war until the Vietnam War. So it's very confusing. Very confusing, and I can't really depict whether and in I think in their explanation of, their explanation of what they based it off of, it's confusing. Like, in the song, it says, "Landmine has taken my sight, taken my speech, taken my hearing, taken my arms, legs, soul, left me with life in hell." But I think in their explanation of what it was based upon, it was a mortar attack or explosion or something. Still, the landmine and a mortar attack, or this mortar shell, are both explosions, but again, confusing. Very confusing. If it were to fit into our storyline, I would say it's about the effects of war. like, let's say they made a friend in they made a friend in when they were still in military service before they came home, and that was about shortest straw. Kind of hard to interpret, as well. I think kind of hard to interpret both in real life term, the real life meaning, and our fantasy meaning. My or own interpretation of it. Harvester of Sorrow. That one is kind of also hard because it's about a feeling. Like Harvester of Sorrow. Like the only thing I can think of for that one is really like some person who thinks they're really above and they're in power feeds on and takes advantage of the sorrow of others who feel sorry for it or have been manipulated and guilt tripped into feeling sorry for this person. That's as much as I can get from those three words. Frayed Ends of Sanity, I want to say it's talking about the effects of, I want to say, in real life, it's obviously talking about somebody who's suffering under several mental illnesses. In our fantasy timeline, though, and story, I want to say, James, Lars, and Kirk are talking about the facts that they're talking about, well, what Cliff Burton had to live through before he died, and attempting their own sanity and own mental health. Frayed Ends of Sanity. To Live Is to Die, again, talking about Cliff Burton in our fantasy timeline. To Live Is to Die, basically, with all that mental stress built on you, both for them and Cliff Burton before he drove himself to death through insanity, and kind of on Jason Newsted's part, being picked on. Doesn't feel very good. And then Dyer's Eve. In real life, it's talking about James again. James Hetfield. Won't get into too much of it because I think that would be another constant thing throughout Metallica's discography. Because in most of where the songs come from, James's background, that's a major theme. Their metal influences, Diamond Head, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, etc. And that's really all I have for Injustice for All. Obviously, I would have to take a deeper glance and analyzation, like breaking down each song with like the effects, like Kirk's solos and his guitar playing, James's guitar playing, his rhythm riffs, and his vocals, which have evolved since Master of Puppets, Lars's specific type of drum choice, and why he chose to turn down Jason's bass. And then there's not really too much to talk about Jason, because how can you talk about it if he's not there? I think, in my opinion, before we conclude this is part 1. This is the 1980s, analyzing and pulling apart Metallica, and kind of building our own storyline. Is that I think by turning Jason's bass down, by tuning him out almost, making sure that he's not heard or seen, which is just as bad. Turning somebody's instrument down when they fully contributed and put effort into contributing towards something they loved to do, I guess, into your project, I guess, because before James Hetfield went to rehab in 2002, it was more of James and Lars were the head of Metallica. They were the alpha. They were the alphas, but James still kind of ruled over Lars. And then Kirk was just there. Cliff was there, and he was James's best friend until he died. Maybe that's why James wanted to always uphold top control over Metallica. And then Jason, he was just collateral damage because of the effects, the mental strain that Cliff's death left on Kirk, James, and Lars. And then now with Robert Trujillo, I think everything is better now. James's rehab. So it's a lot better now. It's not like like from when it was first, like, we're talking about the sad era, I guess. September 27th, 1986 till 2000, till whatever date in 2002 James Hetfield entered rehab. That was the sad period. He was just like, that would include uh 598 EP, Justice for All, the Black Album, Load, Reload, Garage Incorporated, S&M, like their Symphony album, I Disappear for Mission Possible 2, Saint Anger, the Presidio Sessions, or the early versions of Saint Anger. Saint Anger was almost like a therapy kind of ish for the band. Almost kind of closing in an hour now. This part 1 to our 3-part trilogy, pretty good. Overall, I have to say, just it's really, really interesting on what Metallica has brought to the world, and from their peaceful, humble beginnings to being some of the biggest rock stars of all time, some of the biggest metal heads of all time. And that's really all I've got for now. If you like more from this series, if you want me to do the analyzing any constant themes, if you got any constant themes that you've noticed in songs, if you got any songs that you want broken down or something, then comment down below. Like, subscribe. Please bring this channel up to 1,000 likes, 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 views, either per hour, per day, stuff like that. Because again, like I think I've said before, that the more subscribers we got, the more views we got, the better the channel can get. And hope put the word out, put the message out, and thank you for watching. I don't know if you really like my like the content, but again, message down below if you want to see stuff. I think I'll start doing challenges pretty soon, and probably if I can get a better camera, I can do some gaming for you guys. We'll just go from there. But overall, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Please view more. And please support small time creators. Thank you. See you later.